Tonight, we are going to be talking about Red Dead Redemption 1 and Redfall getting 60 FPS patches on PS5 and Series X and S, respectively. More layoffs with Telltale Games and Team 17. A new Steam Deck is coming. Microsoft ABK deal may be closing this week. The Last of Us 2 is apparently getting a remaster. The Uni CEO was retiring. And the PS5 Slim has been revealed. That and more coming up next. This is the place where console and PC gaming talk combine. The Orange Box Podcast, Episode 1, Attempt 3. I am your host, the man who always attempts to make his dreams 1080p 120 frames per second, Nathan, also known as the Frozen Gamer 87. And joining me is my co-host, the man who wakes up in a cold sweat anytime his dreams drop below 60 frames per second, Mr. Justin, also better known as I Am Zeracon. How you doing today?
I'm very good. How are you today, sir?
I am doing fairly well, and as long as our recording actually functions this time, I will be doing even better. And tonight is going to be technically our first episode. Really, it's our third episode because we've already tried to do 2 episodes the last 2 weeks, and unfortunately, both times I screwed up. So we had some serious audio issues. The first time we didn't have any audio recorded whatsoever, even though we had the entire video recorded. And the second time, only one of us had audio recorded, which was Justin. So, third time's the charm? We'll see. God willing, it will be. It will be. All right. So the first thing we're going to be doing tonight is we are going to be just doing a quick introduction of ourselves, giving some basic information in regards to our favorite video games and various other things about us, just so you can learn a little bit about us before we get into the main topics of discussion. So the first and foremost thing is the origin of our channel names. And my co-host, Justin here, also known as I Am Zeracon, why don't you go ahead and give your origin story?
All right. So my origin story goes back to high school and in a homeschool acting group that I was in. And one year we had a theme that was about creativity and we were allowed to create our own skits. My friends and I, we had a skit based around just having a gaming session together. And during that session, my character was really into the game so much that he demanded that everyone called him by his in-game character name. And they said, all right, Justin, just make up a name for your character. And I was thinking, I don't know, I'm Zeracon. And so then one of my lines during the skit was, guys, I told you, call me. I am Zeracon. And ever since then, I was just known as Zeracon. And they said I was the Zeracon guy. And so that sort of stuck, and that's how my channel was born, or the name of it.
I still think that is a fantastic story, and yes, I've heard it already twice because of this being our third attempt at recording. But yeah, it's so much better than mine. Mine is much more basic. I was the Frozen Gamer 87. I became the Frozen Gamer because I moved to Alaska in 2003, and I was there until 2021. And so frozen because I lived in a very cold place where sometimes it would get down to 40, 50, 60 below zero, and 87 because I was born in 1987. Simple as that. So there's actually other Frozen Gamer channels, and originally I was just the Frozen Gamer, but I changed it to Frozen Gamer 87 just for distinction purposes. Plus then I can have my logo with the 87 superscript, very similar to the Nintendo 64, where it has the 64 as the superscript. So anyway, that's my very brief origin story. So, top 3 games of all time, and we are going to start with our number 3 favorite game. Work our way up. We'll go back and forth. So, Justin, number 3.
Number 3 is going to be Dark Souls 3. That is my favorite entry in not only the Dark Souls trilogy, but just out of all the Dark Souls games I've played. I've really enjoyed the combat. I've enjoyed the story. I've enjoyed the bosses and the music. That all has come together to be the definitive Dark Souls game, and it's perfect for my style of gameplay within the Dark Souls. And well, I'll leave that for this other thing for later on. But I just really enjoyed it, and it's the best one for me so far.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. The Dark Souls is in your top 3, or well, specific Dark Souls 3 is in your top 3. And as I've told you before, I'll just mention, briefly that my experience with the Souls games is much less. I haven't ever completed a Souls game, but the ones I played, I've enjoyed. I fell off for various reasons, and I'm not going to get into all that because it'll just take up too much time. But still, fantastic choice. My number 3 favorite game of all time is Super Metroid, and this was my introduction to the Metroid games. I was introduced to Samus through Super Smash Bros., and which then got me interested in checking out Metroid, and then I finally got around to playing Super Metroid in 2008, and I fell in love. I enjoyed the game so much that I ended up playing through it a second time right after I finished it. And obviously, I finished it a lot faster the second time, but it was such a great introduction to the series, and it's really kind of the birth of my love of the Metroidvania genre. And even though pretty much every one of the Metroid games I've played, which is the vast majority of them, I've loved, Super Metroid to me is just the pinnacle of the series minus the wall jumping. So. But now we'll go into our number 2 favorite game.
Okay, well, before I do that, I just want to quickly say, don't know if you can see, but I got this little Super Metroid shirt on. So.
Very nice.
But number 2 for me is going to be Stardew Valley. That is a game that has just been perfect to relax with, and honestly, I've mentioned this before, but it's a game that I didn't really enjoy until I played it with friends in multiplayer, and then once I understood how the game works, and it just clicked with me, I just spent so much time into that game that it's, as far as I can remember, my second most played game on Steam with about 207. Actually, no, it probably even surpassed 300 hours. Like, that's how much time I put into that game because I've enjoyed it so much. I mean, there's so much stuff to do in there between just, of course, the farming mechanics, but also the fishing. There's also the relationships you can build with the other villagers. You can go and explore in the mines, and I mean, there's even an upcoming update with more content, and I'm just thinking, wow, this game is just so much to do, and it's just so fun and has a lot of replayability, so that's why it's my number 2.
Very cool. Yeah, obviously, I've already mentioned to you before, but Stardew Valley is one of those games that I would love to get into because I'm a huge fan of the old Harvest Moon games. Especially the one on Super Nintendo and the N64 one, and even the Game Boy Color one to a great extent. But as much as I tried to get into Stardew Valley, I think between the controls on Switch just not being quite as good, and also just, I think there was other games coming out at the time that I was a little more interested in. I didn't get as much into that one, but my wife really loved it. She played it extensively and probably has 100 or 200 hours in there. I was going to say, 200 hours, that's rookie numbers. And then I thought about the fact, well, for that type of game, maybe not so much. I mean, my highest hour game of all is Destiny 2. but that's over the course of, let's see here, it's from 2017 to 20 over 6 years. And if you count Destiny 1, then that's adds more hours, but that's a whole lot more, but it's also a much longer existing game and everything else. So, but anyway, all that aside, my number 2 favorite game of all time is Portal 2. Portal 1 was fantastic. I love it. It's got great puzzles. Figuring out how the physics work with how you solve puzzles and everything is fantastic already. But Portal 2 just basically took everything that was great about Portal 1 and increased it. I mean, you have a longer game, which having a short game is not a problem, but you have a longer game with more puzzles, more complex mechanics, more mechanics in general, more humor, and also like not only as great as the stuff was in the original game, but even better humor with more great characters. Because the first game you just had GLaDOS, and she was hilarious. And I mean, I guess you had the turrets to a degree, but the second game you have GLaDOS, you have Wheatley, you have Cave Johnson. I mean, just those 3 characters are so incredibly funny. And then on top of that, you have a more intricate story doesn't spell everything out, but it still explains things in such a way that it's like, oh, that's pretty cool. And personally, I love it, especially how they tie it to the Half-Life series. And I mean, I'm just a sucker for that kind of thing anyway, anytime you tie game universes together. And yes, they're both made by Valve, but still, it's just, it's cool having all that happen. And I won't spoil it, but there's just a specific moment in the final boss fight, which if you've played the game, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. It's just like this moment where you're just like, what? That worked? And it's incredible, and I just can't say enough great things about this game. I played it in 2012, and it's been up there for me ever since. And I need to go through and I probably need to just go back through and try to redo all the co-op stuff, and then try to actually get all of the achievements, because I love that game so much, and it's a crime that I've never gotten all the achievements. So anyway, that being said, our number 1 favorite games of all time. So Justin, take it away.
Ooh. Well, you know the answer, and I think that people who have watched any of my content know the answer too. That is going to be Metroid Zero Mission. And it's actually funny that you mentioned this before, because neither of us had mentioned that, is that Super Smash Bros. Was our first introduction to Samus. And, I actually remember thinking, wait, I thought Samus was a robot. And then playing an actual Metroid game and saying, oh wow, I am completely wrong about that. But it was the reason why I picked Zero Mission is because, well, it is the first Metroid game that I played apart from a demo of Fusion at a Walmart kiosk, but the gameplay just felt so good. Samus felt so fluid in her movements. She felt really acrobatic, and that felt great. And even after playing Super Metroid years later, which I still enjoy, I think that's a top tier Metroid game, and it really has influenced not only every Metroid, but every game in the genre. And I would even say that it influenced Castlevania. I mean, Super Metroid came before Castlevania, but before Symphony of the Night, which borrowed influences from
Amazing game.
Metroid. So that definitely is like the grandfather of every Metroidvania game. But I think that a lot of the sort of mechanics, like the movements, I think like I felt better having one button and then just using the directional pad to aim better than having both the shoulder buttons do the aiming for me, for one thing. And then I guess sort of other stuff felt more fluid into playing. It's also like switching between your different missiles and stuff like that. But the one thing I will say is that it is definitely a whole lot shorter. But the only positive I would see from that is if you wanted to do a bunch of speed runs, because it's so much easier to do it that way. But other than that one thing, though, I felt that the gameplay was just so much more refined. And if they made Super Metroid and put it in the same engine as Fusion, and specifically more so geared towards Zero Mission, I feel like that actually would be the best Metroid game that we could ever get. I mean, when I played AM2R, I love the fact that it was made in the same style as Zero Mission, and because of how much it felt like the other game. And so I feel like if you did that with Super Metroid, chef's kiss.
Yeah. I absolutely. Speaking of AM2R, I need to play that. I have it. I've had it on my computer for years and I've never played it. Ooh. But it's mostly because like I hadn't finished the original Metroid 2, where specifically the Game Boy version, and then of course they did the 3DS remake, and so then I just never went back to AM2R. But I need to do that one of these days. But going back to Zero Mission. Fantastic game. I mean, definitely my second favorite, at least of the 2D Metroids, probably, period. Because it is super good. And, I mean, like, as much as I love Fusion as an example, I definitely think that Zero Mission is very high up there as well. I think it's definitely better than Fusion, even though Fusion is a great game.
Oh, yeah.
But... this is kind of going off on a tangent a little bit, but Fusion, my one and only real gripe with it, having tried to I replayed it a while ago because I have I was one of the 3DS. I was a 3DS ambassador, so I got that one as a free game on 3DS. So I was playing it on 3DS. My one gripe is just the simple fact that when you get to a point right near the end, if you go through a certain save room, once you go past that room, you can't go back and get any collectibles. And it's not like, oh, this is immediately before fighting SAX. No, it's like there's enough space to where if you don't avoid this room, you're screwed. You can't go back and get any of those collectibles unless you saved before this. And that frustrated me because I was not ready for SAX. So I tried going back. I tried to go fight it, and I couldn't do it, and I tried and I couldn't do it, and so like, well, I guess I'm not going to finish this playthrough, and eventually I'll go back and make sure I avoid that next time. But
I had no idea about that though.
It was so frustrating because like I think I had maybe 10 energy tanks or something like that, and when I played through Fusion the first time, I had to use save states because that was the only way that I could get through that last fight. And, as far as I could get without it, I wasn't ready. And, if I could get as many energy tanks and get the maximum energy tanks and missiles and everything, that probably would have been fine. It would have still taken me a while, but at least it would have been easier. And it's like, no, I couldn't do it. So anyway, that's that tangent aside. Yeah. Zero Mission, amazing game. But my number one favorite game of all time is Chrono Trigger. And this is another one that I played, this one I played about 20 some odd years ago. The first time I played it was in 2000 or 2001, probably 2000. And it has been up there for me ever since. It is one RPG that I feel like is an excellent length. Like it's got enough time to it, because I think it's like the base game is 25 to 30 hours, if I remember correctly. It's been a while since I played through it from the start, beginning to end. But I think it's probably the first game actually that introduced New Game Plus, and I could be wrong on that, but I believe it is the first game to do that, at least as far as RPGs go. But I don't know. I'd have to look into that and see if I'm actually right on that. But either way, it's got a fantastic soundtrack, great combat, great story, great twists and turns. It's not like a super deep story, but it's a well-told story, and it's not too long. I feel like every one of the side quests is actually has an impact on the story. Like, it's not stuff where you're just going and fetching a couple of things and that's all there is to it. you get, a little bit of money out of it. No, it's like every side quest actually has an impact on characters that you get, and like equipment that you can get that will benefit you in getting through the rest of the story. And then, of course, it also has a bunch of different endings that you can get, most of which are after you complete the game for the first time. You can go and do different things to face the final boss at certain points and make a couple of slightly different decisions, but it's not as dramatic as like Mass Effect or something where you have a ton of decisions that all have dramatic impacts. It's more just like, this affects what kind of ending you can get. And anyway, I love it. I can't say enough good stuff about it. The only thing I will say is that as much as I love the DS version, and in many ways I think it's the best version, I think that the additional content they gave was very tacked on and was pointless. Because it was basically just, they were trying to justify being able to sell it again, but the new content they put on was filler and it wasn't any good. It was bad. It was bad content. But even with that being said, it's still such an amazing game, and I think everyone should play it. But yeah. Now, your most hyped upcoming game that's actually been announced.
Okay, well, I would say Metroid Prime 4, but considering the fact that we haven't heard anything about it in over a year, and also my pre-order, I got an email last week that my pre-order for the game got bumped now to 2025, so yeah, it's safe to say that we don't know when it's coming. But games that I'm pretty certain is going to be coming out soon is going to be, oh goodness, how can I forget the name? Is going to be Agent 64 Spies Never Die, and that is a game that's heavily inspired by N64 games like Perfect Dark and of course GoldenEye 64. And playing at the demo, it really is pretty much just like playing one of those games, but as far as, especially with the aesthetics and just the gameplay and the feel, it really is similar to those type of games, but at the same time, it has that sort of HD polish where the textures are a lot cleaner, and the lighting also has been improved as well. And if you are someone who is interested in the game, I know that the demo is still available on Steam, so you can go ahead and play through one of the missions, and it has, like, similar to the other N64 games, they have those different tiers of difficulty where you would have more requirements as what to do during that mission, so I definitely recommend giving that a shot if you're interested.
Yeah, I can't remember if I've actually seen gameplay of that or not. Did you ever show it on one of your videos before on your channel?
I think I did. I'm pretty sure
if you did, then I would have seen it, because I feel like I've at least heard of that, if not seen it. But yeah, I mean I would be I'll probably take a look at that at least. I don't know how soon I'll actually get around to playing anything related to it, but I'm sure that it'll be a pretty sweet game. And of course, unlike the original GoldenEye, it won't run at 15 frames per second or whatever it gets down to when you have a bunch of explosions going off on the N64. Yeah, that's very cool. For me, as we previously discussed, Persona 3 Reload is the one I'm most excited about, and it's mostly because I enjoyed a lot of what I played of Persona 3 Portable, and I got basically up to a little before the final boss, and I was just... Unfortunately, I've really been playing the game wrong, because I was treating the Personas more like I would treat Pokemon, where I thought, okay, I can take these ones that I got early in the game and then just level them up and they'll be viable for the end game. And it's like, no, that's not how it works in Persona or Shin Megami Tensei. You have to do fusions, you have to get, better, stronger Persona or demons in the case of Shin Megami Tensei. So I was not in a position to where I felt like I could really actually complete the game. It's possible if I went back to it that I might be able to figure out how to get past that, but I have some issues with my Vita and everything after doing some software mods, and I don't even know if I can still access my old save game anyway, so as far as I'm concerned, I'm just going to wait for the remake. And of course, the remake looks fantastic. I'm disappointed that it's not coming to Switch because I would love to play it on that OLED screen, since Persona games on the OLED screen, to me, it's just like you got to have both. You know, Persona 4 Golden spoiled me on the Vita, and then Persona 5 Royal I was able to play on the Switch OLED. I'm disappointed that I'm not going to be able to play it that way. However, I am looking forward to playing it on Steam Deck, because those games are perfect for portable play, and so playing it on the Steam Deck, easily going to be 60 frames per second, which, while not necessary for that type of game since it's turn-based, it'll still be nice, and it's going to look really good. It's going to look better than any Switch versions of games. So yeah, very excited about Persona 3 Reload, and it's coming out right before my birthday, so it'll be a great birthday present. Something that I can really dive into and fully enjoy. Alright, so now, your favorite movie and TV show.
Alright, my favorite movie would be, if I were to cheat, say, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but since it's just one, I'm going with Fellowship of the Ring. Strangely enough, that wasn't the first one that I had seen. It was actually the Two Towers, but I don't remember how I saw it out of order, but when I went back and saw Fellowship of the Ring, it just felt like a perfect setup for the trilogy. The story felt great. The characters, everyone who was acting as the characters, they did a phenomenal job. The score by Howard Shore was amazing, and honestly, I even did. I had a presentation for one of the music classes I was doing, and we had to dissect music. And I dissected some of the music from The Lord of the Rings because I enjoyed it that much. But everything about the movie was just so great that I honestly just kept having to rewatch it again and again, and eventually even just buying the extended edition because I wanted to get more of it. So I felt like it was a perfect setup for the trilogy, and the other movies, they met that threshold, but I felt that the story that the first movie was telling just did a great job, and so that's why I love it so much.
Yeah, Fellowship is definitely up there for me. I mean, I don't know where I would rank it in terms of, like, favorites of all time, but it's certainly up there because, I mean, you know, I saw that movie when it first came out in theaters. I mean, not like the day it came out. It was probably a month or two after it came out, but I've loved it ever since then, and it's definitely one of my most quoted movies. Between that and The Two Towers, I get some of the most quotes of all. Especially, like, I think the thing I quote the most is particularly Gimli talking about the Mines of Moria. My cousin Balin will give us a royal welcome. Roaring fires, malt beer, meat ripe off the bone. And they call it a mine. A mine! It's not a mine.
This is no mine.
Tomb.
It's a tomb.
Yeah, stuff like that. But no, fantastic movie. Great choice. My favorite movie of all time is Escape from Alcatraz. 1973, I think, is when it came out. I could be wrong about that. I'd have to look at the movie again, see what year it came out. But it was in the 70s. Clint Eastwood. It's basically based on true events of a group of men who escaped from Alcatraz prison and how they did it. And while technically it's been considered more of a myth because none of the stuff like officially came out in some sense, at the same time, there was enough evidence to where this stuff was believed to be this is how they got out. And Mythbusters tested out all the different things that they supposedly did, and everything worked. So it was just very, very cool, and it's a great suspense movie, really interesting, and it's a classic. I mean, it holds up extremely well in terms of just being a great movie to watch, so I highly recommend it. Now, your favorite TV show?
That is going to be Batman the Animated Series. It's the first entry I've had to getting into Batman, and I didn't appreciate it as much as a kid as I did as an adult. Rewatching it when I got older, I really start to understand how great the story writing was. I even appreciated more so of the art because as a kid, I actually had a tendency to prefer the New Adventures, or at least Batman Season 4, as it probably is referred to nowadays. Um, and I'm mostly because I thought, oh, this looks cooler, but actually going back and looking at it, I'm realizing, no, actually, there's a whole lot more in the first 3 seasons that I actually liked more than in season 4. And again, also the fact that it has sort of that timeless quality, because on one end you have sort of a crime noir style, but then you also have the retro futuristic art style, and it blends together so perfectly. All the voice actors did a great job, from the late Kevin Conroy to other supporting characters. Even other characters had special story arcs. For example, like with Two-Face, from being Bruce Wayne's friend to just being a criminal, which sadly got sidelined in season 4, and he just was a criminal. But pretty much everyone had a great story behind them, and the music by Shirley Walker was amazing as well. So I think there's just so much there that really makes it something that you could show your kids or your grandkids, and there's something there that they could still find and enjoy there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. I mean, because of how old I am, I was around when it was very first airing, and I was watching it as a kid. And I will tell you that of the various cartoons, like the ones I remember best, as far as the superhero stuff. So you had Ninja Turtles. If you exclude the live action stuff, I'm just going to exclude live action. So Ninja Turtles, you had Batman, you had X-Men, and you had Spider-Man. Of those ones, Batman definitely holds up the best of all of them, by far. I mean, it is the one that really is still extremely good to this very day. And then you have Spider-Man is still pretty good. It's not as good as Batman, but it's still really good, well written and everything. X-Men is a little on the cheesy side, but it's not bad. But then, of course, Ninja Turtles, it's just extremely cheesy and over the top, and not necessarily in a good way, but at the same time, I still love it because nostalgia and everything else. It's a good kids show, so there's at least that. But yeah, Batman the Animated Series is incredible. So I need to finish rewatching all of that. And especially now that I have it all on Blu-ray, so it's well worth checking out. I want my kids to get into it, but the thing is that like it takes a while. Sometimes I introduce these things to my kids when they're younger, and they're just not quite getting into it. And then as they get older, it's like all of a sudden their eyes get open. They're like, "Wow, I love this!" And so it's great when that happens. But it's some Batman is one of those things that I haven't quite been able to get them into yet. So. We'll give it another try one of these days. All right. As far as my favorite show of all time, that is Frasier, without a doubt. Fantastic show, absolutely hilarious. Some of the best humor, some of the best writing when it comes to humor of any show. Period. And I mean, like I've watched a lot of stuff. You know, both stuff within the past 20 years and stuff that came before that. And despite what some people would say, Friends is garbage. At least the first 5 episodes were garbage. They weren't funny at all. I didn't laugh once those entire first 5 episodes. And whereas Frasier, I laughed from the very beginning. I mean, there was just such great humor, and they're actually doing a revival of the show with a new series coming out starting on October 12th, which by the time this comes out will be yesterday. But I'm curious. I'm not entirely sold on it because you're losing a lot of the cast that you had in the original series, with the exception of obviously the titular character being, Kelsey Grammer's Fraser Crane. But at the same time, the behind the scenes thing they did before it makes me think it could be good. I'll watch and see, and if it ends up being terrible, I still have 11 seasons of Frasier that are fantastic and hold up extremely well to this very day. So, anyway, all that being said, your favorite non-gaming hobby?
My favorite non-gaming hobby would be reading, and that is for a lot of things, whether it's reading manga, reading comic books, reading different literature novels. Like, I enjoy reading as a whole. Something that I got into when I was really young. I remember like my mom taking me to the library, and something that I still enjoy now. In fact, I've had several orders of books that have come in within the past few weeks just because I wanted more to read.
Now, the real question is, which is more embarrassing, your book backlog or your game backlog?
I will say that okay, yeah, it's definitely gonna be the gaming backlog. I do have unfinished books, but I have fewer unfinished books than I do games.
Yeah, as I've told you previously, my wife is very much in the same boat in terms of being very heavily a reader, and I would say her backlog of books is nowhere near as extensive as my backlog of games, but it's also mostly because there's just a much wider variety of games that I've purchased throughout the years, and I mean, her books tend to be longer in how long it takes for her to get through them. But even with that being said, well, it doesn't matter. Anyway, I will say I'm not much of a reader. I was a lot when I was younger, and then as I got older, it's just been difficult to stay focused long enough to read, and I like being able to do more than one thing at a time. So I like audiobooks, and I will do audiobooks while I play games, or while I'm mowing the lawn, or while I'm driving, or walking, or working, things like that. So audiobooks are great, and regular books are great. I don't stick with them as long as I should. But my favorite non-gaming hobby is cooking. I learned a little bit as I was a kid, and kind of developed more and more as time went on, especially during my time in Alaska, when even when I started to actually have money that I could spend on restaurants, we didn't have any restaurants where I lived. So it was basically like, okay, well, if I want Mexican food, I need to start learning how to make Mexican food. Or if I want Chinese food, I need to learn how to make Chinese food, or, so on and so forth. Basically, the only thing that we actually did get, probably maybe 5 years or so before I left that particular town in Alaska, was we had a Thai truck. It was really good Thai food. Really, really good. That's like the only thing I genuinely miss about that town. And other than the quiet, but that's not important. So yes, cooking is a hobby of mine, and I greatly enjoy it. So much so that even after a long day at work, most days I'm happy to cook dinner for my family. So yeah. All right, so we got through our basic introduction stuff. All we're going to talk about right now before we go into news is what we're currently playing. So Justin, go ahead and take us off of that.
All right, so I am currently playing Sekiro Shadows Die Twice, and actually, that's actually what I was playing right before we did this recording. I finally beat this boss.
Nice.
I was stuck on.
Is that the one you were talking about last week?
Yeah, and I now can safely say that I understand how the game works, and I think I'm more confident now moving forward in the game. But I've also been playing Stardew Valley with some friends. We've been playing some multiplayer sessions. We didn't know where it had been a while since we played, so we didn't know what we were doing. But we got back into that, and I just started, and I think the video should be up by the time this goes up. But I just started playing a game called Influence, which is sort of a game that teaches you a different language. And I started learning some German.
Okay. Sprechen Sie Deutsch. And I don't really know any German. That's like about the extent of what I know. Your Bratwurst. Perfect Nugen. I don't know. Schnitzel. Sauerkraut.
Danke. But yeah, that's all that I've been playing.
Cool. Yeah, so my list last week was pretty extensive because I was trying out a bunch of different stuff for just recording gameplay and everything. This week, much less so. Basically, this week has been 2 or 3 games. So I've played a lot of Assassin's Creed Odyssey because I just kind of got back into it, and even though I want to play other games, I'm also just at the point where, all right, I'm ready to just push through and complete all the story missions so that I can finally be done with the game, because I started the game like 4 years ago, and I played off and on, sometimes for long periods of, I'd play for days and weeks on end, off and on, and then I just take a really long break, and then I finally came back to it last week when wanting to just test out some stuff on the Steam Deck, and finished out the main story. And since I had already bought the DLC some time ago, I decided that I'm going to go ahead and do all the DLC missions that I haven't done, and I'm going to just completely ignore all the random, bases and whatnot that I haven't completed. I'm not even going to bother touching those, because I spent a lot of time doing that before, and that's how I got so burnt out, because there's just too much in that game. But yeah, the combat is good. I think the combat is fun, even if I'm not a huge fan of the RPG elements for an Assassin's Creed game. I feel like the combat is enjoyable for the most part. And so that kind of helps with it. It just gets, in some ways, a little bit repetitive. But, yeah, so I've been focusing a lot on that. And I got back into Red Dead Redemption 2, because I still haven't finished that. And I really want to finish that before I go back to replaying Red Dead Redemption 1. Because when I originally played it on PS3... Red Dead Redemption 2 didn't exist, didn't have all the story that led up to Red Dead Redemption 1, and Red Dead Redemption 2 is a prequel, so it's really, I think I'm going to enjoy Red Dead Redemption 1 that much more, knowing the backstory for John Marston and all the characters that he encounters, whereas if I went back into Red Dead Redemption 1 without finishing 2, I wouldn't have enough of the background to where I'd be able to be like, oh, that's what happened to that character, and so on and so forth. And it's just, I want that connection there. Plus, also, Red Dead Redemption 2 is a fantastic game. Of course, it also looks and runs well on Steam Deck and on PC, and so I kind of played a little bit of both. I feel like there was something else I played too. I'm trying to remember what it was. Maybe I'll check my Steam Deck. Look at that for a second. I did play some more Box Boy and Box Girl with my son. We've been working on that because that has co-op, so we've done a little bit of that. Not as much this week as we did the previous week, but just double check. Oh, that was the other thing I played. So I've been Outer Wilds. That's a game that I completed the story, the main story, and the DLC, both of which are absolutely fantastic. Highly recommend it. But there's one achievement left that I have for it, and I want to get that achievement because it bugs me that I'm just missing one. And it's the particular achievement. You have to ride the face of a tidal wave on a raft for 15 seconds. But the thing is, because this game has a time loop to it, this only happens once in the time loop. So if you miss it, you have to start the time loop over again in order to get another chance at it. And so I've made numerous attempts, and I've gotten close a couple times, but I still haven't quite gotten it. So I was trying to do that, and I did not succeed yet. But yeah, I think that's basically it as far as what I've been playing. Alright, so any other thoughts before we start getting into the news?
No, sir.
Alright, so the news. First of all, we got updates for 2 games that got a lot of backlash for not having 60 frames per second, and those games now have it. So Red Dead Redemption 1, which was released for PS4 and Nintendo Switch in August, now got a patch where the frame rate is uncapped on PlayStation 5 through backwards compatibility with the PlayStation 4 version. So now runs at 60 frames per second, which is fantastic because that's definitely a game that would benefit from the higher frame rate. It's a great game either way, but you know, there's absolutely no reason why it shouldn't run at 60 frames on the PS5. So I'm very glad that they did that. But I think a little bit more significant is that Redfall, which is of course only on Xbox and PC, now has a 60 frames per second performance mode for both Xbox Series X and Xbox Series S. Redfall is one of those games that I actually thought looked pretty fun, potentially. But then, of course, finding out that number one, it didn't have 60 frames included, which wouldn't have necessarily affected me on PC, but that and just some of the other issues that the game had in general. I mean, it was never a game I was going to spend $70 on anyway. It was more like, okay, when it's cheap down the line, I'll try it out. And, you know, when I have time for it. But, yeah, I'm still of the opinion that I'm going to wait until it's cheap because I have more than enough games to play without that. And it's not something that I was, like, excited about. It's just more like I looked at it, it's like, oh, that looks like it could be fun. But anyway, your thoughts on both of those? Or one of them?
Oh, I think that obviously it's a great thing. I'm obviously, you know, there's no reason why Red Dead Redemption should have been capped up until this point, you know, at not being 60 FPS. But it's great that it's 60 FPS, and I think it's especially great that Redfall is going to have that 60 FPS performance mode for the Xbox Series S, considering that it's like a week run out. Like, I think that it should have been there from the beginning for Xbox Series X. That's a more powerful hardware that is, you know, considered to be the more gamer-ish hardcore version of the Xbox Series to get. But the fact that the Series S, which has been known to be one where developers make more compromises for, is getting that 60 FPS performance mode, that's great. It's something that, again, because it's one weaker hardware, it's something that may not come to every game. It's something I would still like to see more in the future. Just because of the fact that, you know, I know that people say, you know, next generation games should be more demanding and, you know, show what the hardware can do. But at the same time, I don't want us to keep going back into a new generation saying, okay, it's going to start at 60 FPS, then we're just going to backslide into 30 FPS like midway through the generation.
Right. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I personally think has been the biggest detriment to games is 4K. And
yes.
The reason why I say that, I mean, like, if it was 4K for like a 2D game, you know, or if it was 4K where they weren't trying to get super realistic, then it would probably be okay. But the problem is that this focus on visuals over performance is the reason why things are not moving forward. We've gotten to this stagnant point where the whole selling point of the PS5 for most people is that it has better load times because it's using a solid state drive, which solid state drives have literally existed for decades. Now, the current form of solid state drives are certainly way better than the ones that existed back in the early days of PCs. But I mean, like, early PCs had solid state drives. They were just in a different form, and they weren't nearly as technologically advanced. I can't remember exactly what it was made up of, but it was basically at a point where if you bumped one of those just wrong, it would erase everything. So,
Oh gosh.
solid state's come a long way since then. Now, it's much better designed, and I mean, even with the SATA SSDs that we had before we started getting the NVMe drives, those are dramatically improved over what we had in the past, and solid state is fantastic. And the PS5's solid state drive, it's a great drive for what you get. But the fact that we've gotten to this point where video games, basically, they're so focused on having realistic visuals and having 4K and everything else that they don't focus on having a better gameplay experience has just been detrimental. And it's just become stagnant in terms of game design. Like, I do enjoy some of the games that still come out. I know as much people like rag on Sony for having what people like to refer to as walking simulators, and there are some of those for sure. But most of their games, yes, third-person, over-the-shoulder action game with stealth elements. That's a pretty accurate description of like the vast majority of Sony games that come out nowadays. But they can still be enjoyable. Like, I love God of War 2018. What I played of Ragnarok, I love. It's not a dad simulator as much as the Xbox fanboys who are unwilling to acknowledge that there are good games made by Sony as well. And I'll get to PlayStation fanboys in a little bit. But, it's not a dad simulator. Yes, you are playing as a dad who has regrets and doesn't want his son to make the same mistakes that he made. I mean, if you're a father, you understand that completely. If you're not a father, you might still be able to understand it, at least theoretically. But it's just we've gotten to this point where, because games are so focused on graphics, we end up with games that perform well below what they should be performing. The fact that we probably have more games running at 60 FPS just by default on the PlayStation 2 than we have on the PlayStation 5. And I could be wrong on that. I'm totally willing to accept that I could be wrong on that, but I think that more games at least aimed for 60 frames per second on the PS2 than they do on the PS5. And yes, the PS5 has a lot of games with the performance mode where they'll at least aim for 60, if not actually maintaining it. But then you have games like Final Fantasy 16 that its performance mode is dropping into the 30s, which... why? That's not performance. I mean, it's like you're too focused on visuals and you're not focused enough on making a game run well and play well and trying to improve the mechanics and come up with different ideas and everything else. And you'll get the occasional game that's actually unique and has something new to offer, but then you also get a whole lot of stagnation where it's just creative bankruptcy. There's just nothing new, and it just gets so boring from that standpoint. And yeah, I'm not going to pretend that like I don't buy any of these games, because I do buy some of these games. I like some of these open world games, but then it gets to a point like where you get Assassin's Creed Odyssey as an example. Since I'm playing that, and its follow-up Valhalla, where the game becomes, I mean, it's a beautiful game. It looks incredible, especially on a good PC, but even on like the PS4 and Xbox One, it looks incredible. But it doesn't run that well. And then on top of that, it's so bloated that it just, I mean, it's like the very definition of open world fatigue. I mean, if you look up open world fatigue in like the Urban Dictionary, you're probably going to see a picture of Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I mean, it's ridiculous how much these games are like that. And I've been ranting about all of this, and yeah. I'm going to stop right there.
Well, I'll just add a brief, I guess, little note to that, is that this sadly doesn't just happen on consoles. Like, we get this on PC in the form of ray tracing. Like, in the fact that if you want to have ray tracing, you can't do it natively and have 60 FPS unless you use DLSS. Like, games are trying to brute force it just by having better hardware and more powerful hardware rather than just trying to better optimize the games. And it's just like, why should I need to buy an RTX 4090 to play this game at 60 FPS with ray tracing on?
You have to
and
generate
DLSS
fake frames in order to make this game run well. And then they go and they do the path ray tracing, just basically taking it to the next level where it's like it looks incredible, but it runs at like 20 frames per second by default unless you generate fake frames. And I just yes, you're absolutely right. PC has issues too, and I'll definitely have. I mean, there's definitely plenty of things to say negative about more PlayStation fanboys than PlayStation itself. Even though we'll definitely get to more of the PlayStation itself stuff once we get to talking about the PS5 Slim models that got revealed, but that's going to be towards the end. So yeah, I belongs to TLDL, all of that. I think it's great that Red Dead Redemption 1 and Redfall both got 60 FPS updates, especially since Redfall was actually promised, and Red Dead, it wasn't promised, but it's great that they did it anyway. But I wish that more games would just focus on performance over looking prettier, because looking prettier, we just end up with the same situation where we keep ending up with games only running at 30 frames per second to look nice, and then they look so pretty, but they run like trash. They don't run anywhere near as well as they should for what's supposed to be these super powerful consoles that really are not powerful at all. They just load games faster, and that's it. Anyway, enough of that. Went way off on tangents just talking about this, and I wasn't expecting to, but yeah. Obviously, it's one of those things. There's a reason why I aim for 1080p 120 frames per second. Because I'd rather have a game that looks nice without going overboard and runs well, so that I can just have an enjoyable game experience. Even though I can live with 30 frames per second on the weaker consoles or handhelds, especially when it's a handheld form. Actually, I do want to mention real quickly, because I forgot to mention it before, one of the reasons why I decided to get back into Red Dead Redemption 2 is because since I got a $50 gift card from work for winning a chili competition, I decided to go ahead and use it to buy Red Dead Redemption 1 physical for Switch. So that'll be coming on Friday. And I'm not gonna be able to get to it right on Friday because I'm not done with Red Dead Redemption 2, but I wanted a portable version of that game, and unfortunately, even on the Steam Deck through emulation, that game does not run well. It runs worse than 30 frames per second, emulating the PS3 or 360 versions. So I'll play it on the Switch, and if I can figure out how to safely overclock my Switch OLED, then it's possible to get 60 or close to 60 on Red Dead Redemption on the Switch. So, anyway, moving on. So we got news of some more layoffs for both Telltale Games and Team 17. Now we'll talk about Telltale Games first. And this is specifically a bunch of people who were working on The Wolf Among Us 2. Now, did you play the first Wolf Among Us?
The first one, no. I actually started getting into later Telltale games, primarily around like the Batman Telltale's time period.
Yeah, so Wolf Among Us, I will say it is definitely an M-rated game in just about every sense of the word, but it's super interesting, and definitely had some great twists in there and stuff. It's been a long time since the first season came out, or, it's not, I don't know if it was called a season or not, but anyway, the second one, a lot of us have looked forward to it, and of course, a while back we had Telltale basically closed down, and they kind of got revived, and now, I think did they say it was just the majority or the entire staff for Wolf Among Us?
It was most of the staff. That's what I believe the article said, was like most of the staff were, or at least a lot of the staff were laid off.
Yeah, so the way I'm looking at this now is that game's never coming out, which is disappointing. I mean, it's like, okay, it's been years since I played the first one. I never thought we were going to get a sequel, especially, years and years passed, and then, of course, the whole Telltale closure before they got revived, and then they announced it, and I was kind of at a point where it was like, okay, I'll believe it when it actually happens, but now I'm just basically thinking, okay, it's never coming. It's just not coming, so it's disappointing, and it sucks for people to have to get fired, especially with this whole Telltale situation, because it's like, okay, probably a lot of these people, some of these people may have already had, been fired previously from Telltale when it closed down, and now they're getting fired again after all that, and I don't know. But Team 17. So I had to actually look up the kind of games that they published. Have you looked much into their published games?
Yeah, I know that the Worms franchise, that was one that I know is like one of the more popular ones. Mm-hmm. However, I think a lot of the games that I actually more know of were the games that they published that I didn't know that published. Like, for example, Blasphemous, I know, is one that's like a sort of like Spanish Inquisition style 2D Dark Souls type of game, pixel art. And oh gosh, what was the other game? I can't remember. It wasn't Ukulele. I think it was a game that was similar to
Ukulele. The Impossible Lair was the 2D side scroller one. I did see that they published that.
Okay, yeah, that's what it was. But so like a lot of the published games were games that I didn't know that they had worked on. But like the only one that I do know that they themselves developed that was popular is the Worms games. Like that's primarily what I know them as, like the Worms developers, because of that strategy, those strategy games. But yeah, like it. Additionally, it's still kind of odd seeing a smaller company have to downsize. Like I don't know what specific was causing these issues, but I do know that seeing a company that isn't as large, and because of that, at least I would imagine it's easier to maintain because you don't have all these separate, I guess, divisions and whatnot, and you're able to, I guess, or as I would imagine, you'd be able to be more efficient with what you're doing. But seeing a company like that have to have all these layoffs, I mean, I guess this is just another, I guess, ripple effect of how we have all of these gaming companies having all these layoffs. I mean, the article that I saw, it mentioned all the different companies that have been that have had these layoffs, and it's just I think it's at least 7 gaming companies have had layoffs so far this year, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, on one hand, I still think that to a degree this is applicable, not so much as to the smaller companies, but especially for the larger ones, like the big AAA companies. I think there's just a lot of bloat there. I think that and I think it was even, I can't remember if it was either Sony or Microsoft who said that it was Square Enix who said that putting out so many huge AAA games is not financially stable. It's not something that is financially stable for them. And I think that's true. Putting out so many AAA games and having this focus on all these big graphics and pushing these new boundaries. I think that doing that, also having to constantly hire all of these Hollywood grade actors and just all this stuff, I feel like there's so much stuff, and especially that marketing is one of the hugest parts of the budget for game development. I feel like you could cut off so much of this stuff and save money and just have more modest expectations. Don't go for trying to push into, say, quadruple A territory. Just have something more manageable. Don't try to be making these 100 plus story hour games and try to make all of these I don't know, 20 solar system sized open world games. Like, have something that's more manageable. I mean, I feel that the PS3 era-ish type of games, you know, games sort of like, you mentioned this before, Assassin's Creed Black Flag, games like Arkham City, games with those size, they were manageable. Right. But yet they still felt large and livable. Like, yeah. I felt those were perfect size games. Like, so having something like that, you can flesh out those games. You can have more content in them. You could probably even, you know, increase stuff like sort of physics and like go into actual buildings. You can do so much more of that if you just don't set your expectations so high. Again, this doesn't apply to smaller companies like Team 17 or even Telltale, but the other companies, the large ones, I think there's no reason to not do this.
Right. No, I absolutely agree, and you know, it's one of those things that I kind of got reminded of, you know, with obviously, you know, we were talking earlier about just this focus on 4K and everything, and one of the things I didn't mention, which is certainly a big problem and is part of the reason we're seeing so many layoffs, is just the reality that because they're so focused on these visuals, the cost of these games is ridiculous. And that's the reason why we have $70 games now, and why some people are like, oh, well, I'd be willing to spend $80 on a game. And, you know, a lot of people will point out, oh, well, they did this in the Super Nintendo era. Well, the Super Nintendo era, they did it with certain games because the size of the cartridge, or, you know, like the chips and everything they had to use for the game was more expensive. So the cartridge is more expensive to produce, therefore they had to charge more for it. And nowadays, it's just because they make the budgets of these games so enormous because they're so focused on making it look as realistic as possible and making it long and padded and everything else, that it ends up just being a situation where you have these huge games, they can't meet they can't meet expectations in terms of sales, so then they end up laying people off, and then you keep just having the same cycle repeat itself over and over. Whereas when you focus on quality over visuals, you have the opportunity to put something out there that's really great without having to sacrifice so much in the long term. Of course, the problem is that it's kind of a catch-22 situation. If you don't put out something that's visually realistic and incredible looking 4K, so on and so forth, people aren't going to buy them as much because they want those kinds of games. But at the same time, because you make these games, they end up being too expensive, and then if you don't sell as much as you want to sell, or you don't sell as much as you need to sell, then you end up having to lay off people, close down studios, all this other stuff. So it's just, I appreciate it when studios will actually make the effort to put out smaller games that can still potentially hit. Because at least if they're not spending quite as much money, it's not necessarily going to hurt them as much if they're not selling 5, 10 million, whatever. Even, I mean, you know, a lot of studios, most studios, they sell 1 million copies of something, they're ecstatic. But because of the way these AAA budgets are so stinking high, if they're not selling 3, 4, 5, 10 million, then they're not happy with their sales numbers, and they're laying people off, and they're closing down studios. And I mean, you know, going back to Team 17, you know, like looking at some of their games, like the Overcooked games. Oh, personally, yeah. Those kinds of games, like that would stress me out. I mean, it's one of the reasons why I don't ever want to go into like doing an actual restaurant in real life or anything else, is because having to cook food like that fast and everything else, it may not be as crazy as Overcooked, but you know, it's like it's a really high stress situation. It would take something that I love to do, cooking, and make it stressful and not enjoyable anymore. And but yeah, so you know, you put out these smaller games like Overcooked. There's one of them that I was reminded of, a game called Timesia. And
oh yes,
I saw that one. I was like, that one looks really cool. But of course, because I have yet to actually finish the Souls game, I haven't even tried this one, because I'm not buying more Souls games until I at least finish one of the ones that I bought. even if there's only 2 of them. But yeah, I mean, it's just like they have plenty of smaller games. Obviously, the Worms games, like you mentioned, which I've never played, and doesn't really look like my kind of thing. Blasphemous. And but apart from the I love the way it looks. I think visually, I love it. I'm not sure about. Okay, so I'll have to ask you: did you actually play these games? Either of them?
Like which ones, or like all?
Blasphemous 1 or 2.
I haven't played either of them.
Okay, so I will say that the art gives me pause because, and then of course the title of it being blasphemous makes me wonder if it actually gets blasphemous, and then I would just be mad at the game. Which is, and not because of how difficult it is. So I, as much as I love the way it looks, I'm not gonna play these games. But anyway, yeah. So I don't know. It's hard to see this kind of stuff happening. See lots of these studios closing down, and I just feel like we've got to be headed towards another video game crash at some point. I mean, it's hard to say for sure whether or not it'll happen because the last one was like 40 years ago. So I don't know, but in some ways I think it would be beneficial if it just happened and kind of had to go backwards, but I don't know how it ever will happen because we're just in such a weird spot now compared to where we were 40 years ago when the last video game crash happened. So, I don't know.
I will quickly say though that Dimesia is the closest we'll probably get, at least for a long time, to having Bloodborne on PC.
Yeah, who knows? Maybe we'll see it next year. Of course, we'll probably be saying that every year. I mean, at least we're getting a pretty decent set of PlayStation games coming over. I mean, this year we've already gotten. I mean, ignoring The Last of Us Part 1, which I think actually is fixed now. But I mean, you had Returnal come out this year. You had Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart come out this year. You had.
Didn't Miles Morales come out this year?
No, that was last year.
Okay.
Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection. I'm pretty sure that was this year. You had, what was the other? Maybe Ratchet was the last one. Oh, and then Horizon Forbidden West is announced for early next year, or sometime next year, probably early next year. And we know Ghost of Tsushima will be coming at some point because it's in the NVIDIA leak. And I'm not sure what else, but yeah, anyway. Got off topic there. So, but speaking of smaller types of developers / publishers, the Unity CEO has apparently, well, not apparently, but has retired following the backlash regarding the monetization changes where they're trying to charge people a bunch of money, or charge developers a bunch of money for every time someone on the user side of things would install a game made with Unity. And we're not going to get into all of that. People have covered this topic to death, but this guy, quote-unquote, retiring, or probably getting canned, I say good riddance. Especially because I didn't realize this beforehand, but this guy also had previously been CEO at EA a couple of times, and he's the guy who brought up the idea of if people ran out of gas in one of the racing games, purchasing some more with microtransactions. And yeah. So one thing I will note with EA, there was a time period, not surprisingly, while this guy was not there, because he was there for a while and then he left in I think 2007 and then came back in 2014. Between 2007 and 2014, there were some really good single player games in there. I mean, like a nice variety of different types of single player games, and then he comes back and back to business. And then he left. I don't remember when it was he left. I know I saw the figures on this earlier, and I think it was oh no, it's Alex covering some of this stuff previously, but basically, you know, every time he is involved, there's always like some really gross monetization involved, and unfortunately for Unity's sake, I think it's too little too late. You know, they can fire this guy, and it might help some, but the damage is already done. And I don't know that this is really necessarily going to make the difference, unless they just, well, even if they say, you know, this was this guy's decision. I mean, you know, this was this guy's recommendation, and now that he's gone, we're not doing this. I mean, how can we know whether or not how can developers know whether or not they'll trust them? It's like I was saying when we were talking previously, they've already showed their hand, and they can't take it back now. Everybody knows what their future plans are, and even if they decide that they're actually not going to go through with any of those future plans, there's no way to know for sure because they've already seen this is what we had in mind to do to you. I don't know. Your thoughts?
You did a great job sort of summarizing everything that I would have said. Like, it definitely, the developers really can't trust them. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. That's the situation that they have there. Again, and as we mentioned before, you know, some developers might not have a choice, say between if they might have to use Unity as opposed to say like using Unreal Engine because it's more expensive. They might think, well, I'd rather not, because Unity could still come back and implement this idea sometime later down the line, but I can't afford to use Unreal Engine. That could be a situation for some people, and even still, like, I don't think that the article said too much about the new CEO, or at least the interim CEO. So I don't know about his history as much as I know the previous CEO. So I don't know what his mentality is. And additionally, I don't know, even without that, I think one of the things is, I think it was either last year or the year before was when Unity went public. And if that's the case, they're going to be more so concerned about, you know, their shareholders than actual gamers, which is, you know, what sort of led us to this point, is the fact that, you know, thinking, how can we get in more revenue? Let's charge the developers for every single download. Like, that's, yeah. So that's like another reason why I would say I can't necessarily, developers wouldn't necessarily think, can we even trust you?
Yeah, and one of the things that I found out about that I didn't realize with Unity is that, I mean, I can't remember what all Unity's used for. Because I mean, a lot of it's smaller games, but there are some bigger games, like Genshin Impact is a Unity game. And you think about how huge that game is, and how much money they'd be making off of that. Not that, you know, it would necessarily harm the developers in any way, because, you know, they make a buttload of money. But, you know, the amount of people installing, uninstalling, reinstalling that game, you know, people who get into these very addictive MMO type games, and then they try to stop playing for a while, and then they decide to reinstall it and play it some more, and so on and so forth. But yeah, good riddance to this guy leaving. I don't know what's going to happen with Unity. Just something we're going to have to wait and see going forward. But I hope that regardless of what happens, that it does, I mean, that anyone who is involved with Unity who was not on board with this decision has already made the decision to move on and find employment elsewhere, because this is a sinking ship and you need to get off while you still can. But speaking of terrible CEOs and how they lead to different things, that's not really a good way of putting it, but The Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal is apparently closing this week. The scuttlebutt at the moment is that Friday, so by the time this podcast comes out, it is theoretically going to be closed. So this long, dramatic situation where you had terrible CEO doing terrible things to people, and then Microsoft decides to buy them when they decide they want to go on sale. I don't even know what to think about this anymore. I've kind of expressed my thoughts previously that I'm mixed on how good of a thing this is, but at the same time, I also think of the people who could buy Microsoft, buy Activision Blizzard, I almost am more comfortable with the idea of it being Microsoft than like Amazon or Google, or even Apple to some extent. But I don't know. It's one of those things. We're just gonna have to wait and see what actually happens with all this. And any thoughts you have on this matter?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely talked about it quite a bit the past few weeks, but I think I'm really just want this thing to end. It's just something that's been dragged out, and we already said before, FTC is going to try fighting this. Like, just let it go. I mean, we've gone on long enough with this thing.
Right.
I just want this to be done. Like, similar to you, I don't like the idea of Activision being purchased, but at the same time, it's better than if it was, Google or Amazon, and like I think even Netflix at one point might have been eyeing it, but just like it is what it is. I don't like it. Get rid of Bobby though. Just please get rid of him. Hopefully, other decisions that Activision has done, particularly with like microtransaction stuff. Microsoft will try to get them say, hey, tone this down some, and then maybe I'll be more interested in getting back into Activision games. But I just want this to like go through, be done, no more fuss, no more I just want this to be like done with. Like, I'm just tired with it at this point.
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll see how everything goes. Let's just go ahead and move on here. So kind of going backwards on our list, but there is apparently a new Steam Deck coming, but it's not what people were thinking that it might be. It's not a hardware revision in being like a Steam Deck 2, that sort of thing. From everything we can find, what is apparently the codename Deckard, I believe, is what this is supposed to be, but I could be misunderstanding on that part. Basically, this is just a Steam Deck that has improved Wi-Fi and improved Bluetooth. That's all it is. So otherwise, it's basically the same hardware as previously. So it's basically like a soft revision that's going to be taking place behind the scenes, and will probably just ultimately replace the base models. But yeah, I guess my thoughts on the matter are plain and simple that if you don't already have a Steam Deck, this is great. Get better Wi-Fi. That means better download speeds, because download speeds on the Steam Deck can be pretty bad at times. Better Bluetooth can just improve, reduce latency for listening to, or for headphones and that sort of thing. But I don't know, your thoughts?
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely not thinking too much or even expecting too much from this, and it would be great if you mentioned that it is just something that can just silently replace, how all the current, Steam Decks that Valve is selling. Once those models are completely gone, just replace it, swap those out with the new version, and they call it a day. It's great. This is great if you don't have one already. If it is just better Wi-Fi, because I don't really use the Bluetooth, but if it did have better Wi-Fi, if it had something else besides the better Wi-Fi, I would probably have a slight. I mean, stop myself, I would say maybe I might do that, but it's just like no. I mean, the Wi-Fi would benefit me because, as you mentioned, the download speeds can be bad. Like I've had to wait like maybe 15 minutes for a game to download on my deck, depending on what it is. But it would be nice. One thing though, because they said the performance wouldn't matter, but something that I think the video also mentioned was like, maybe better like cooling. So I was thinking, or at least hoping, this would be something that would get me intrigued, as if it somehow improved the efficiency of the battery. That's something on my that would be on like my theoretical wish list to have.
Right.
I know that you would have a theoretical wish list of having an OLED screen. but yeah.
Yes, for me it would be definitely the OLED screen would be the number one thing, and then the number two thing would probably be having more options in terms of colors. Even though at some point I'll probably just replace the shell on mine, because I really want that atomic purple type shell, like the old school Game Boy Color, because like so many people who grew up in the 90s and were, those were like our formative years. That is very much something that is just like, it's super cool. I still love it. I have a game. Well, I had to repurchase a Game Boy Color a number of years ago, but I do have the atomic purple one, and I just love it. And I love my N64 controller that's like that as well. But yeah, so yeah, I mean, this is like, I'm not in any way interested in buying this. It would be hard for me to want to buy a new Steam Deck anytime soon. Even if they released a new one tomorrow and it was more powerful, I probably wouldn't, because I don't need it. And I've gotten to a point where I already have enough devices collecting dust, because it's just how it goes with consoles, And I mean, yes, the Steam Deck's not a console; it's a PC, but like, I'm even hesitant about buying a Switch 2 right now, because I have more than enough games to play on my current Switch and my 3DS and my Vita and my actual like consoles that are tied to the wall, to where it's like I don't know. But anyway. So yeah, just a minor Steam Deck upgrade. I'm glad about that though, because then I'm not tempted at all to get something new, because it's like, okay, yeah, the download speeds are not great sometimes, but it's really not that bad. And considering that I've also done it at my in-laws' place, where the Wi-Fi is much worse, much slower than what I have at home, it's really not that bad at home, even at its worst, compared to what it is at their place. All that being said, now we're going to get into the PlayStation topics. And I said I said that the PlayStation fanboys were not going to get away with it, and I'm not necessarily going to rail on you too much, because I leave that to better men. I mean, men who are better at doing it, like Oh No, It's Alex, Griffin Gaming, Joe from Seattle, and Crab Named Heller, I think is the name of the channel. Anyway, there's a bunch of great channels that already do plenty of roasting of fanboys, and I'll just leave it to them to do their stuff. But there's a couple of PlayStation announcements. Well, one of them is an actual announcement. The other one is more of a leak, I guess you could say. So we're going to start off with the leak. The Last of Us 2 is getting a remaster. And there's really no reason to doubt that this is actually happening. I can't remember all the stuff how we found out about this, but it's pretty much, I mean, without being officially confirmed, it's basically unofficially confirmed. And so we have no idea what, if anything, this will include that's extra from the version that was released on PS4 in 2020. All we really know is that it will be on PlayStation 5 and probably PC at the same time. Most likely. Very, very likely. But before I get into all the stuff I have to say about the situation, I want to hear what you have to say.
I think to sum it up, the one word would be why.
Yes.
I mean, the game just came out last generation, and people were saying about how great of a game it looked. Like, I don't think it's a game that needed to be remastered. I think there are more games that you could either remaster or remake. I mean, you could take you went to this before. Infamous. You could remaster Infamous for the PS5. You could take other like was it wasn't was it Sly Cooper that Naughty Dog? Was that them? Or am I thinking of a different
no,
game?
Sly Cooper was Sucker Punch.
Okay, Sucker Punch. But
Naughty Dog did Jak and Daxter.
Okay, Jak and Daxter. They could remaster Jak and Daxter. They could do so. Yeah, because Sony brought back Ratchet and Clank. They could Jak and Daxter. That's another series that was right alongside Ratchet and Clank. Like, people would love to have that brought back or remastered. So you could do that, but you chose The Last of Us Part 2, and that just doesn't make sense. One thing that I do remember from hearing from Spawnwave is saying that he thinks the game could be $70. I don't think Sony is going to do that. I think at most it will be $60. I mean, I don't think that Sony's crazy enough. I don't think they're crazy enough to do that. I think they probably tried to make the excuse for part 1 by saying, well, it's from PS3, it's a PS3 game, we're doing much more for it to make it look better. But you don't have that same excuse here. It's a game that came out last generation. At most it should be $50, but I think it might be just $60.
All right. Well, if you want to bet on that, and I'm not a betting man, but I would bet that it's going to be $70, and it's mostly because they know that there are people who will just buy it, and it's one thing when it's a person who doesn't already have the game, has never played it, that sort of thing. I still don't think they should buy it because they could get the PS4 version and they'd already have 1440p 60 frames per second. and most likely this version will... I don't know how they can make it any prettier because it's already a beautiful game. Like, it is legitimately one of the best looking games. One of the most realistic looking games that exists. Even if I absolutely hate what they do with the story. And I'm sure gameplay-wise it's great. Everything I've heard, because I haven't played this, I'm going to be very clear, I haven't played this. Everything I've heard is that the gameplay is a significant improvement over the original version, the original Last of Us, and the remaster on PS4, which basically just bumped up the frame rate and made it a little prettier. And even gameplay-wise, it's better than the quote-unquote remake of The Last of Us Part 1 that they did for PS5 last year. But this is a pointless remaster, except to milk people for more money. This is all it is, and I firmly believe that they're just going to charge $70 for it, straight up. Theoretically, they could add in some content, but I have a feeling that more likely than not, it's going to be the exact same game. They might slap on Director's Cut and add some commentary or something that you can get once you've beaten the game. Maybe, I don't know what additional accessibility options they could have, because I was going to say accessibility options, but they already made it so you can play it as a blind person, which I think is really cool. I think it's great that they did all the stuff they did from that standpoint, but I think they're probably going to charge $70 for this, and then it'll be $60 on PC, most likely. Unless they actually decide to get away with $70, but it kind of depends on who ports the game too. I haven't seen much of anyone defending this. I have seen at least one person who was defending it through some of the Salt videos I watched earlier today, and I will just say that person's a moron. I'm just gonna say it. They're dumb. Comparing it to the Mario Kart 8 versus Mario Kart 8 Deluxe thing. I don't want to get into all that. I'll just leave it to the experts on the salt stuff. But I know that there are situations where we will get remasters of games that came out on the previous generation. And sometimes it's understandable why they do a remaster, why they bring it up to the new console, because there's no backwards compatibility. Like, for example, with when they went from The Last of Us, which came out in 2013 on PS3, and then they did The Last of Us Remastered, I believe, early 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And I'm pretty sure, actually, I think it was cheaper. I could be wrong on that. I'm not positive. I know by the time I got it, it was $20, but that was like a year and a half after the remaster came out, and I didn't play it on PS3. So like that situation, it was understandable because a PS3 game wasn't going to run on a PS4 because of the cell architecture of the PS3, all that. Or rather the cell processor that just was a nightmare to try and port up. But they made it work really well on the PS4. It was 60 frames per second, and that was great. I thought it was a good game. Even if it's not a game I'd probably play again because it's just my personal tastes. But then they did the remake of Last of Us 1, in which, yes, they did... Well, I mean... I think it's basically a remake in the same sense that Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition was a remake of Xenoblade Chronicles, where they updated a few things graphically, and it definitely looks better than the previous version, but it's not like a ground-up remake as much as they might try to claim it, especially based on some of the issues the game still has, from what people have said. But once again, I didn't play this version, but The Last of Us Part 2 came out... Well, it was basically 3 years ago. Still plays really well in terms of its gameplay. On the PS5, it already has 60 frames per second at 1440p. I think basically the extent of what they could potentially do is maybe bump it up to a checkerboard 4K at 60 frames. And that's probably what they'll probably try to sell it on. It's possible they'll do more to it than that. We'll have to wait and see what actually happens with it, but I think the main reason they're really doing this is because Last of Us Season 2 is going to be coming out on HBO, and so they want to have it ready for that so that people can play that beforehand, and because they probably figure that a lot of people would rather have that PS5 box than just play the PS4 version of the game. Even though it would definitely save them money because you could probably get The Last of Us Part 2 for like $20 now. Versus get the PS4 version for like $20. Whereas if they, charge $70 or even $50 or $60, they're going to be getting more money out of it. I still firmly believe they're going to charge $70. But I don't know. I mean, we'll see what kind of official details we get, and we'll talk about it again whenever we get the official details, but I think that $70 is probably going to happen, and thankfully I know enough people who are PlayStation fans and really love The Last of Us Part 2, but they will not be buying a remaster because there's no reason. And then other people will definitely be buying it because it's the greatest game ever, apparently. Alright. Any other thoughts before we move into our final topic for the night?
No, I think I'm good.
Alright. The PlayStation 5 Slim has had its models officially revealed. This was actually leaked a while ago, and we saw some pictures, at least of portions of it, and the leaks were definitely real, as we've now seen the official models. And I will say, offhand, before we get into anything else, I personally like the way it looks. I think it looks neat. I liked the look of the original PS5 as well. Of course, the best thing about the original PS5 is the Kaiba meme, where they, because Kaiba's popped collar from Yu-Gi-Oh. That was the best thing, and then taking the DualSense and making it look like Strong Mad from Strong Bad. And I have a DualSense, even though I don't have a PS5. I have a DualSense, and I use it for my PlayStation games and a couple other here and there. But yeah, all right. Before I get into my thoughts, I definitely want to hear what you have to say.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely is better aesthetically looking than the original one. I think, though, after you did the math of some things, and also another thing is the fact that it is going to have more storage space than the original PS5, which, especially for the digital version, that was kind of stunk to have less space, especially since, in this day and age, as games are larger, you need more storage. But I think the number one thing I actually liked was the fact that the digital version does have the option to get a disc drive, so that way you can actually play physical discs. So while I think you actually might go into more of this because you did share a few things, so I'm actually going to save that discussion on your end. But I do actually at least like the fact that you have that option, because say, for example, I don't know, for some reason had a digital version, then say, oh, I don't know, you lost ownership of your digital games, or say years down the line, you want to play, PS5 games, but they don't sell, the PS5 games aren't sold digitally anymore. You can go ahead and purchase the physical games and play them that way. So I think that's great. I think that in some sense it kind of brings back ownership, even if some games you might need to have patches to actually play the games. I still like that you can still do that. So that part I like. But for the negative side, I think I'll leave that part to you. So go ahead.
All right, so I'm going to start off because I didn't mention this earlier. So regarding the price points, so the disc version of the PS5 Slim is going to be $499, just like the base model of the PS5 with the disc. The digital version is going to be $449, so the price has gone up by $50. And then we get into the real scummy parts of this. So, okay, I will say by default, first of all, this is the very first time, and I researched all of this, found as much as I could as far as records go of the actual launch prices for each version of PlayStation, including the handhelds. That's not counting the PS4 Pro because it's a more premium model, so obviously it's going to be more expensive. But looking at all of them, PlayStation consoles and handhelds, every time a Slim version, whether it's a second revision or a third revision, came out, it was always cheaper than the previous version. Now you might be thinking, oh, well, the PS5 disc version, the PS5 Slim with the disc, is the same price as the PS5 with the disc. That's the non-Slim version. But that's where you're wrong, because it turns out that they are no longer including the stand with it. So if you want to be able to stand your PS5 upright, or even just put it horizontal to where it's going to be more stable, it's an extra $30. So by default, this in and of itself, you're paying an extra $30, ends up being $530, and of course that's before tax, shipping depending on where you're getting it from, that sort of thing. And of course, if you're, depending on where you're buying it, it's potentially even more expensive than that. But that's more just dependent on rarity and where you live and that sort of thing. So that may not seem like, okay, that's a huge deal, but it is. It's like, okay, well, it is a price increase for the Slim model, which has never happened before this. But then you get into the digital version, which is even worse. Because the digital version, if you get, I mean, of course, like the one with the disk drive, does not include the stand, so you're spending an extra $30. So you already have the $50 increase. And yes, this does have slightly more storage. This has about 200 gigs of extra storage for each version of the system, which is good, but considering some games are ballooning to be 100 or more gigs for just that one game, it's not necessarily going to make a drastic difference. And the reality is 200 gigabytes for when you have games as big as they are nowadays, it's really very little. I mean, it's an increase, but it's not enough of an increase. And I'll get a little more into that as we go on. But with this digital version, if you decide that you also want to buy a disc add-on to it, well, I do think it's really cool that they have the option, and the way they have it set up is pretty neat. Because it actually just attaches, and it's not just like an external USB thing that sits on the side. It's $80 for that Blu-ray drive to add it on. So in total, if you bought the digital version and then decided, wanted to stand with it, you're spending $480. If you decide down the line that you want a disk drive to go with it as well, or even if you just decide that you want to do this in general because you want to keep it digital most of the time and then just occasionally use the disc because you don't like the way the disc thing looks, whatever, you're spending $560 for this version of it. And of course, that's before taxes, before anything else. So the price has gone up quite a bit. And while I definitely could see how people would say, oh, well, but it is getting more storage, so it's fine. It's a slimmer version. It's nice. But the thing is that number one, these slim versions of the consoles, whenever they come out, they're always cheaper. The original PlayStation came out at $299. The smaller version, labeled the PS1, which came out quite a few years later. It was like I think 5 years in the US. Was only $99. It was a pretty big gap, so it was understandable that the price had dropped so much more. But it's a smaller model. It's technically more efficient. All that. It's cheaper though, cheaper to produce, and so they sold it for cheaper. The PS2, same thing. Started at $299. When they released the Slim, it was $199. That's actually the one that I have, is the PS2 Slim. And I have the original PS1. PSP was $249 at launch. Then the second and third models of the PSP, I actually forgot to write down the PSP Go, but both the second and third models of the PSP were down to $199, but they also came with a game, a UMD movie, or I think one of them was a UMD TV show and the other one was a UMD movie. And then one of them came with an additional memory stick, which was their proprietary memory card, for $100 or for $50 cheaper. Throat's getting dried out. Give me just 1 second here. All right, and then of course you had the PS3, which had the more disastrous launch because of how much they charged for it, but that was $499 for the 20 gigabyte version, $599 for the 65 gigabyte version of the PS3. Then when they released the revision, the Slim, it was $299 for the I can't remember the I forgot to write down the exact specs, but it was I think it was 160 gigs for the $299 version, and $320 for the 320 gigabyte version. Maybe that's right. I don't know if that's right. Anyway, the point is that $299, $320 were the Slim prices, for one having obviously larger storage. So you got more storage than you had for the starter one. And it was slimmer. It was cheaper to produce. And so they charged less for it. By quite a lot, too, in fact. Then you get the PS3 Super Slim, which had two models as well, $270, $300. So still cheaper still, came with more storage in each of those as well. So we're talking the Vita. We started off with $300 for the 3G/Wi-Fi model, best known as the OLED, the Fat Vita, which is what I have. $249 for just the Wi-Fi model, also an OLED. Then they did the revision with just the LCD screen, 1 gigabyte of onboard storage, which previously had no storage internally, and that was dropped down to $200. Then you have the PS4, which originally launched at $399 with a 500 gigabyte hard drive. The PS4 Slim, I forgot to write down the storage space it has, but I believe it's 1 terabyte, if I'm not mistaken. And that was $100 cheaper at $299. And then we get to the PS5. $399 for digital, $499 for the disc version. And then the Slims, which do have upgraded storage by about 200 gigs of usable space for both of them. Goes up to, starts at $449 for the digital version, going up to $560 if you decide to get both the stand, which is more or less needed, and the disk drive, which is optional, up to $560, or $499 starting for the PS5 Slim that has the disk drive, and goes up to $529 if you get the optional, the technically optional but really not optional stand for it. So, all that explanation. If you buy the PS5 Slim, you're getting ripped off. And this is the first time Sony's done it, and I think that honestly, it's because they're arrogant and they know they can get away with it, for the most part. Now, from having talked to a lot of people who are big fans of PS5, they probably won't be getting this upgrade, because they don't see a reason to. But I know the economy's not in a great state at this point, but it is cheaper to produce than it was before. There's no reason for them to be charging extra, except that they want to nickel and dime you. And of course, the simple fact that they're taking out the stand, which is basically not even an optional thing. It's something you really do need if you want your PS5 to stay in better condition long term. It's like they tried to make it seem like, oh well, it's not actually more expensive for this version, but it really is. I mean, no matter what, unless you actually decide to skip the stand, because you can't just use the stand that you have for your original PS5. It's not going to work. It's not the same size, and so it's not going to work. And so if you want the stand, if you want to be able to stand up your PS5, whether you're putting vertical or you're keeping it horizontal, you need to have some kind of stand, and so you have to pay this extra money no matter what. I don't know. All right, I've said enough. Justin.
Yeah, I was just waiting because I saw all the numbers that you had crunched and just like going through everything, and I'm just like, wow, like you took a lot of time into that. I really respect you for doing that, but it definitely is, because I mean, like when I first saw that, I was like, hey, that's pretty nice, it's nice to have that. But then when you actually did that comparison and went over the prices and how much that changed, I thought, wow, that actually, Sony really tried to blindside us. And I do acknowledge the fact that Microsoft has increased the price of the Xbox Series consoles in, I think, if not just Japan, like certain Asian countries, they've increased the prices there.
That's true.
And so I do acknowledge that what Microsoft's doing there is pretty scummy, and especially the fact that it's the same model. Like, it's not even a different model. It's literally the same thing. They're just raising the prices, and they could do that at any point, over in Western countries as well. But at the same time, though, that doesn't excuse the fact that Sony is charging more for the same thing. Well, even in a sense, less to get, because whether even you're getting just the disc version, that doesn't have the stand for it either. So you still have to pay for that as well. So there's really no justification, because things should be getting cheaper as time goes on. I mean, this past generation doesn't count, but with GPU prices, they go down as time goes on. Consoles have gone down. Like, I don't remember, like, I bought my 3DS when it was discounted. My first 3DS when it was discounted. I don't remember what the price was for it, but I got it for, I think the discounted price was $180. Like the GameCube, when I got that was discounted down to $100. These things should be going down over time. It's been, what, 3-4 years since the PS5 and Xbox came out.
Almost 3
those
years.
Those prices should be starting to go down. I mean, because things have gotten better than like right during the right in the middle of the pandemic, especially, well, not necessarily with the pandemic, but just because of scarcity. GPU prices, while they still are overpriced, we have seen the prices of GPUs go down. And so the console should be going through the same thing. Like, I think this is just another thing that, and sadly in this case, it's gonna be bad because this is actually hitting hardware and not just the games. A crash, another video game crash might be something that could fix this. I don't know, but especially since this is hardware, not necessarily with games, where, yeah, if the video games themselves crash, we have indie games that could start to take over. We have AA games that can start sort of like to pick up the pieces, because, you know, they can make games that are decent as far as visual quality, but are still great with performance at that level. But with the hardware, especially for consoles, if that crashes, like partially as a result to these increased prices, when they should be going down, I don't know what would happen there. But that's just what I think.
Right. Yeah, and I'd forgotten about Xbox increasing their prices as well for the same model in some countries. And yeah, it's just, and I know that Sony and Microsoft aren't even the first ones who've done it. You know, other companies have done that. Like, I remember I think it was Meta, you know, doing it for the what's their VR headset called again?
The Oculus.
Oculus, yes, that's right. Yes, I can't remember if it was them or if it was some other company, but it was some VR headset that they decided to increase the price of the model that was already out by quite a bit. But yeah, it's just like, okay, yes, there was scarcity for a while because of chip shortages, and then of course scalpers and everything else just adding on top of all that. But I don't know, like, this, to me, there's not really a good excuse for this. There just isn't. I mean, it's been, not quite 3 years since the two consoles came out, and they're bumping up prices, and they're cheaper to produce now than they were 3 years ago. And this is outdated hardware as it is. So, I don't know. I don't even know what to think about this stuff anymore. I don't think anyone should be defending this, especially when you really think through it, and when you recognize that this is the first time that Sony has ever done a hardware revision that was more expensive than the original. Now, it'd be one thing if these were prices for, like, the PS5 Pro. I'd give them a thumbs up, because that's actually a good consumer-friendly price, because you're doing something that's more powerful, probably is going to have more storage. I mean, even if it is only just that additional 200 gigabytes or whatever, the simple fact that it would have more power would make it kind of make up for the cost increase. But the fact that basically they're increasing the price by taking out something that is technically not optional. I mean, it is sort of optional, but realistically, your PlayStation is probably going to degrade a lot faster if you don't have a stand, especially with the way because it's not flat on the bottom. If you're laying it down horizontally, then it's not flat. So that's going to make it so that it's probably going to wobble a bit more, which could cause degradation over time. If you're trying to stand it up vertically without a stand, it's probably going to topple over a bunch. And so it's like you're taking away this thing that's really technically essential. It makes a big difference having it, and doing it as an add-on is stupid. I mean, I'm not sure if this is worse or taking out the charger for the new 3DS was worse.
Ooh.
I mean, for me, it didn't matter because I had chargers since I already had both the original and a 3DS XL. But for people who didn't have either of those, didn't already have a charger or wanted to trade in their 3DS, then it was probably more of an issue because they're spending the extra money. And yeah, granted, that was only like $10, $15 compared to $30 for a stand, which honestly, I don't even think that makes sense. I think that's way more. That's way more than it should be. I mean, I think when I bought a stand for my PS4, which didn't come because it didn't come with one, which didn't technically need a stand unless I wanted it up vertically. I mean, I think I spent like maybe $20 for that at the most, and that was something that truly was optional. Like I could keep my PS4 horizontal, and in fact now that's what I do because I keep it on my desk so that I can have it hooked up to my computer, and that way I can just play on my monitor and don't have to sit at a TV. Plus then it's easier to, like, if I want to record or stream or whatever, and it just looks better on a monitor. So there's that. Play on monitors, do that. It's better. It's better. It's way better. But yeah, it's just solidified my decision not to buy a PS5. I mean, like, I already was... I decided a while ago that I wasn't going to be buying PlayStation 5. I've never bought an Xbox, and even though I do like some of their games, since, of course, their games have been coming to PC for years now, and which completely defeats the purpose of me buying an inferior piece of hardware for when I can play the games on PC day and date. And, PlayStation, I've owned every single PlayStation. In fact, I still own every PlayStation but the PlayStation 5. I still have my PS1, my original PS1 that I got in the year 2000, with all the games that I had for it, even though I didn't have a lot of games. I still have my PS2 Slim that I bought in 2006, specifically for Kingdom Hearts and Final Fantasy X, and then eventually Dirge of Cerberus and Final Fantasy 12. I still have my PS3 Slim that I bought late in like 2011 for $100 from a friend, which was fantastic that I got it so cheap. Even though it didn't come with a controller, but I had one previously that I'd bought for PC before figuring out that it didn't really work well with PC, which got me to buy an Xbox 360 controller that otherwise I was never going to buy because it worked natively with PC, and since then I've gotten an Xbox controller with each generation, and think they're great controllers. But and then of course I still have my PSP, which I think I got in 2008, and which also was late, but that was mostly for Final Fantasy games, Crisis Core, Dissidia, Kingdom Hearts, Birth by Sleep, to play portable versions of Final Fantasy 7, 8, and 9, etc., etc. And I still have my Vita that I bought in 2014. And I love the system. It's still one of my favorite handhelds. But I'm not buying a PS5, at least as of right now, so unless someone gives me one for free, then I will probably never get a PS5. I'm not gonna say never. I'm not gonna actually say never because I don't know that I never will, but I'm not planning to ever buy one. And this type of thing where they're trying to charge more for a hardware revision, nah, dog. Not gonna happen. All right. Any other thoughts before we close out for the night?
No. I think we did a good job covering everything.
Yeah, so this was obviously a longer episode, and mostly just because this was our third attempt at episode 1. And I think this time we actually did it. We actually recorded it, and there's no reason to believe that it didn't record properly this time, but God, I hope it recorded properly this time. Very last thing we're going to do here, and this is going to be an every show, end of the show thing, is one thing that we want to recommend and one thing we want to dissuade you from doing. And I'm going to go ahead and let you go, Justin.
All right, I am going to do a little bit of a shake up from previous weeks.
Right.
My one thing that I want people to do, something I want to encourage you to do, is to back up your files. Make sure that you manually save, because you cannot trust autosave. Autosave
Amen.
will fail you. That has happened to me before, and it has been both good and bad. Good when I had already manually saved and I was just fiddling around with editing something, and then system completely crashed. But because I had saved when I did the autosave was completely corrupted, and I lost a whole lot of layers to an image. But because I had already manually saved, I was perfectly fine. Bad situation, I was writing. Crashed, I wanted to recover. There was nothing to recover. So 5 pages gone. But so yeah, make sure you manually save and do it periodically, because that can save you. Now, one thing I want to dissuade you from doing is using Wi-Fi if you don't have to. If you can just plug directly into your router, use Ethernet. Not only will you have a better and more stable connection, well, not only have a better connection because you will have higher download and upload speeds, you will have a constant. You should have a constant connection, not something that will fluctuate like with Wi-Fi. So definitely do that.
All right. Well, my recommendation, I don't think I'm going to change it from the previous weeks, but my recommendation is learn how to cook. And the reason I say that is because there are so many situations where being able to cook will benefit you in real life. And this is something that, especially if you're a single guy who's doesn't have any prospects, that sort of thing, whether you are looking to potentially find a wife and get married, have kids, all that, or you are in a position where you're not looking, or that sort of thing, it's still a skill that's really beneficial. And the nice thing about it is that it's a way that you can control what goes into your food. Both of my parents died from cancer. They definitely ate plenty of fake foods. And I'm not even just necessarily talking about junk food. I'm talking about using things like margarine and vegetable oil and a lot of the prefab processed foods. And whether or not that actually contributed, it's hard to say. God only knows exactly what it was that ultimately got him to that point. But something that I've been trying to commit myself to doing is to making sure that I use the best ingredients I can as much as possible. And it's not always easy. In fact, it's difficult a lot of the times to find something that doesn't have the garbage, fake, genetically modified processed ingredients in it. But the nice thing is that when you start to learn how to cook for yourself, you can control that a lot more easily than you can if you don't. Because if you're doing always the prepackaged processed food, fast food, etc., you're guaranteed to get junk. And some places are going to be better than others, but you're still going to get a lot of junk. So learn how to cook. It's also a great way to just develop a skill. I mean, it's a skill. It can become a passion like it has for me. I love to cook. And, you know, all the time I put into it over the years, it's the one thing that I'm legitimately good at. And I take great joy out of it. My dissuasion. I think I'm going to lay off the fanboys this week. I ranted a lot about not being a fanboy the past couple weeks. And I will very briefly kind of cheat and say, don't be a fanboy. Even though that's not really my dissuasion for this week. But actually, you know what?
Uh-oh.
I mean, I don't think I'm going to rant like I have the past couple weeks about what it is being a fanboy, but I'm not sure actually I have another dissuasion at the moment. So, yeah, I'm just going to say it. Don't be a fanboy. It doesn't matter what you're a fanboy of. Now, I personally think that of the fanboys that there are out there, and I should back up real quick and say, being a fan of something is not the same as being a fanboy. You can be a fan of PlayStation, you can be a fan of Nintendo, you can be a fan of Xbox, you can enjoy their games, you can even prefer their games. But the second that you start defending their bad decisions, their anti-consumer practices, the second that you start bragging on other people who are fans of games because you don't particularly like that plastic box, or you don't like that particular game, or you don't think you'll like it because it's on another plastic box. The second you start thinking about the fact that, oh, this game is not on my particular plastic box, therefore it sucks, that's being a fanboy. Now, I love Nintendo games. Not all of them. There's plenty of them that I don't really care for. A lot of them I'm just not interested in playing. But there's some great stuff on there. And I'm a recovering fanboy because I very much was on the Nintendo Defense Squad for many years. And it's only been more recently that I've backed off of that and realized that that was just stupid because Nintendo's got plenty of problems, but I can still enjoy their games without being a fanboy. And I love a lot of PlayStation games. I got into most of the franchises not really until PS3, because even though I had a PS1 and a PS2 and a PSP and even Vita, I didn't really, I mean, it took me a while to start getting into the PlayStation franchises. So PlayStation was more Final Fantasy and Kingdom Hearts for me than anything else. And just RPGs in general. But I find that PlayStation makes a lot of great games, especially during the PS3 and PS4 generations. But I'm not a fanboy of them. I think I see a lot of problems. In fact, I think that they're, in some ways, one of the worst publishers in terms of just how they treat their customers and that sort of thing. And I think that probably if... I mean, they're not nearly as bad as the fanboys. The fanboys are the real problem, though, because they just are constantly defending their plastic box. They're constantly ragging on people who like Xbox and Xbox games, and they're ragging on Xbox games that they've never played, never will play, just because they're not on PlayStation. It's as simple as that. Same people who were bragging about the possibility of Starfield becoming a PlayStation exclusive, the second that they found out that it was going to be an Xbox exclusive, decided that they hated it. And they've been relentless ever since. And then there's the Nintendo fanboy, who will absolutely defend the Switch and say it's the greatest gift ever to grace mankind, because it's made by Nintendo, and because it has Nintendo games on it. And as much as I love the Switch, I still play it all the time. It is a weak piece of hardware. It is a very weak piece of hardware, and I guarantee you that the Switch 2 is going to be weak too. It's going to still probably be fun, and they're still going to make some great games. But let's be real. Third-party ports are often garbage on there. You know, I've suffered through some of them, including games like Ghost Runner, which is... I absolutely love that game, and the first time I played through it was on Switch. But that game looked awful on there. It ran pretty terribly, especially at certain points when it got down to like single frames per second. I don't know if it was actually that low, but it was really bad at times. And I suffered through it, and I made it through. And then I played it on PC, and I saw the light. Praise the Lord, I saw the light. Or, you know, like, what was it? The Outer Worlds on the Switch. Wow, that game looks terrible. It looks so terrible. And I suffered through it for a while because I got the game for $20 when it was on steep discount. But it just becomes a blurry mess. And the performance tanks to the point where it stopped being playable, and I had to just give up on it. And then I got it on PC, and once again, so much better. PC fanboys can be a problem too, because you can get so caught up in frame rates and visuals, and the fact that obviously your hardware is superior. I mean, that's a given. It's like obvious. Of course, the PC is superior in terms of hardware and capabilities and everything else. But then you fail to acknowledge that there can be good games on consoles. Consoles can have good games, and there's nothing wrong with that. So, to sum it all up, don't be a fanboy. Just enjoy video games, no matter what platform they're on. Try different things. You don't have to buy consoles if you're a PC guy. You don't have to buy PC if you're a console guy. Enjoy what you enjoy, and let everybody else enjoy what they enjoy. Please, don't be a fanboy. If I had a mic, I'd drop it right. Alright. So that's all of it. Anything else right before we end now?
I just want to say that I've enjoyed every week just hearing this, and I'm glad you kept that dissuasion, because I just wish I had some popcorn, because listening to you, it's just been very entertaining.
Maybe we'll just do like a Michael Jackson popcorn gif at the end there, or you know, like eating the popcorn from the Thriller video. All right, so that's all we got for this episode 1, part 3. As we close out, tell everybody where we can find you.
Alright, you can find me at the channel I Am Xeracon. That is IAMXERACON, and because YouTube has the @ feature now, like other social media like Twitter, it's just at I Am Xeracon.
Alright, and you can find me youtube.com/@thefrozengamer87. I do not put out as much content as I Am Xeracon here. I recommend you check out his channel, because even though he's not a huge channel, I mean, he's bigger than me, but more because he puts out semi-regular content. I do not anymore, and there are times where I'll put out more content than others, but at least right now, it's not looking like that's going to happen a whole lot. I just don't have the time for it, but that's part of why we're here. Talk about video games with a cool guy. Check out his stuff. He makes great content. Well worth listening to, watching, whatever. And sometimes you'll see games in his gameplay videos that are actually will get you interested in trying out something new. So that's another plus. Or attempt 3. I don't know which one to call it. Third time's the charm. Episode 1 is complete. The Orange Box Podcast. Check us out in the following weeks. Check out I Am Xeracon. You can check me out if you really want to, even though my content is pretty minimal. Other than my 24-hour stream that's coming up for Stack Up, raising money, October 27th. But until next time, Orange Box Podcast. I don't know how to actually close out this podcast, so we're just going to say that. Bye-bye.
Wait.